Hey, everybody, I'm Corey Tanisoff, joined by Gerald Mendoza, and this is another episode of Let's Talk Politics. Today, we have an especially relevant discussion going off of the protests centered around the Minneapolis protests and the ones we have seen around the world, and based off of the George Floyd murder that people are rallying around. But before we even get to that, we have a special guest on later. But until we get to that, we are going to start out discussing various political events. First up is the incoming national election that will take place later this year. So, Gerald, can you tell me what the numbers look like a little bit right now?
All right. Based on the latest polls and averages done by Real Clear Politics, which is where I usually go for all of my polling information, they seem to have a good grasp of getting anything from every side of an argument and really doing a good job of showing a general view of what the mindset of the nation is. Based on their average of about 8 different polls, Joe Biden, former Vice President Joe Biden, is leading. He's been leading for quite a while, but leading over Donald Trump by about 5.9 points. That's a spread of 1 point done by the Hill/Harris X poll, and then an 11-point spread done by Quinnipiac. So averages out. Fox News notable poll because it has Joe Biden 8 points ahead of Donald Trump for this, for the race. And I believe you had the betting odds also.
I do.
Usually the betting odds are a little more indicative based on the way things could swing throughout actual election night. They've been having Donald Trump up by about 6 or 7 points for the last about 2 months. But what are you seeing recently on the betting polls?
So currently I'm looking at in the last day, and today is June the 1st of 2020. President Donald Trump sits at a 47.3 chance to win the election, with Joe Biden, former vice president, at 45.9, a 1.4% gap in between the both of them. The next closest is, as it is betting odds, people like to bet on a way underdog. So it's Hillary Clinton at 1.5% of the total percent chance to win the presidency, even though she hasn't made no motion towards making a run for this year. My concern looking at the polls and Quinnipiac in first is the exact same thing that we saw in 2016, where polling fails us when we're looking towards a Republican and fly-by territory demographic, which is what famously won Donald Trump's campaign in 2016 to get him as number 45, is these people are not going, they're not answering, or they're not being asked by these news outlets like Quinnipiac, which is local in, I believe it's in Iowa. Quinnipiac is located. I could be wrong on that fact, but these places are not reaching out to your Missourians or your people in Arkansas or even further out. Like if you're looking in Wyoming or Utah, they're not looking out in that area, or the Dakotas. So we see a bit of a number skew because it's easier to access urban areas than it is to find anything else. And that given, I think that 11-point gap by Quinnipiac could be shrunk down to a smaller number. But what I really see here is we have a close race. I mean, it comes down to, do people necessarily want 4 more years of Barack Obama's presidency, which we would get under Joe Biden? You can't debate that fact. Joe Biden is running off of an extended Obama era platform. Or do we want 4 years of the same of what we've had? And it seems like an increasing number of people are comfortable with what we have had, for better or for worse, and they're looking to reelect 45 to stay. They're not looking for a president number 46 just yet. However, this number can change, as do all other numbers. Gerald.
In terms of just a quick comment, this is just a personal comment. I don't remember it even being this close last election, the day of the actual election. So, obviously these numbers are polling, but we've seen how much polling doesn't matter sometimes. But this is the best. This gives us the best idea of what we can see.
I believe a certain MSNBC poll had him at 12% for winning the presidency for Donald Trump. And we now have him instead of Hillary Rodham Clinton as our president.
This is correct. This is true. Yeah. So take polls with a grain of salt. If you look at betting odds, they're probably a little more. They look at pure statistics even a little bit more, and where to get the research from. So still have Donald Trump ahead, but that lead technically is shrinking. But like you said, if this is indicative of anything, it's that this is probably going to be one of the closest races we've seen in a while. Who knows? We might end up with another, battle for Florida.
Yep.
Right. Another battle that lasts a month. We don't know.
I just want to mention that the election betting odds are courtesy of Maxim Lott and John Stossel. Odds are from FTX.com, Betfair, and Predict It, which is where they are getting their cumulative votes on that. But as you were saying, Gerald, I mean, it comes down. They say there's three types of lies: damn lies, and statistics. And you can bend statistics any way that fits your case. And in these cases, it doesn't always come out to be the truth, as we saw in 2016. But I do believe that we are either in store for another 2016 or another 2000. I do not see it being anything else but that.
There's not going to be a landslide, is what you're saying.
I don't believe that at all. I think that, when I say that, I think that it would be a 2016, as in come October, Donald Trump is polling at 28% and he comes back to win something, or Joe Biden is polling at 34% and he comes back to win, but by a sliver. But as you said, I don't think that there's going to be a landslide. I think it's going to come down to the counts, and we're going to sit there on the 1st, or I think it's the 6th of November this year.
Right.
And we are going to sit there until 2 a.m. waiting for votes to come in from precincts.
Right. And taking a little more local now, we also, because tomorrow in the state of Maryland is the last day to turn in your mail-in ballots. If you have not done so already, there should be a known location for a ballot drop-off box, or you can put it back postmarked with the prepaid stamps that should be provided by the Board of Elections with the envelope that you received. Tomorrow is basically election day and the last day to turn in your election ballots, either through the mail, where they're going to pick them up, or through the election drop-off boxes. And one of the biggest things is that the Baltimore mayoral race is very close in a three-way tie. There's a large field this year, but a three-way tie, or not a three-way tie, a three-person race, really, who are at the top, the most probable people who can win. Right now, on a poll done by the Baltimore Sun in conjunction with the University of Baltimore and WYPR-FM, it showed that there was a three-way race between Sheila Dixon, Miller, and Scott. And if you remember, Sheila Dixon was already the mayor of Baltimore before. She had been basically told to resign. She had to resign due to some, I believe, bribery issues, which is not a good look, but somehow she's been able to save enough face to get that much support in this campaign. And the other candidate, so she is tied with Miller with 18% of support of Democrats polled in this study, and Scott has 15% of likely Democratic voters who were polled. Everyone else, including a former deputy attorney general for the state, Thiru Vagnaraja, he's in fourth place with 11%. Former police spokesperson T.J. Smith has 6%, and the incumbent mayor Bernard C. Jack Young has 5%. So those three are basically being written off by the city's biggest paper. So it's basically turning into a three-person race. We're going to have to watch very closely to see who is going to be most likely the next mayor of the city of Baltimore, and whoever it is has got a massive job on their hands. There have been a number of problems with the internal affairs of other politicians in the state, the city council, the police department. Corruption has been running rampant for years now, and the city is still very poor in general. Like, there's some nice parts, obviously, but if anybody knows just the general understanding of what Baltimore is right now, is that it's basically a welfare state. People are just, getting paychecks from the government, trying to live off of that as much as possible, and not, there isn't much progress being done, and most of it is the fault of the leadership that is not taking the right steps to fix the problems that are running rampant in the city right now.
Well, exactly. I mean, if you want to look at, if your route through Baltimore every day is on Fleet Street and you take in Lombard, or if you go through and you even just take Pratt Street, then you're not going to see what everything means. Then if you live in Fells Point, you have an understanding, but that's one of the more areas that is associated with high living, and you have an income behind you. But if you take a ride down MLK and you take a left on McCullough and you keep going down past the McCullough homes all that way, and you get to North Avenue, you get to Reisterstown Road, and you get to Park Heights Avenue, right down there, you see what we're talking about. And as you just said, it's the city is rampant with corruption and problems. 2 of our last 3 mayors have been enveloped in some kind of scandal. It was Catherine Pugh, who recently was indicted on charges of corruption, and before that, Sheila Dixon. And now we have a Jack Young currently in office who is not polling in the top 3.
You forgot about Stephanie Rawlings Blake, who
Rawlings Blake, yes.
To her credit, did not. It's bad, but to her credit, did not involve herself, or at least it hasn't been known that she's involved herself with any corruption scandal. But she did end up not running for re-election after
the 2015 riots.
A poor handling of what happened in the city of Baltimore after the death of Freddie Gray.
Absolutely. And then even you look further back, and you've got Martin O'Malley, and he poorly handled the police situation in Baltimore and made it even more unfair to minorities living in the city, and instituted New York's broken window policy, where you put a broken car and then crime is attracted around that. He instituted that, where you police these high crime areas, and ended up making a significant population of Baltimore feel like they were prisoners in their own homes. Now, what I really think is important to look at the Baltimore Sun's opinion work survey is that the 22% of voters remain undecided on the issue. They have not committed. 22% can flip to anybody. 22% could flip to Mayor Jack Young and surge him a election to finally be elected or reelected, I should say, to the mayorship position. 22% could be split evenly, but that 22% is the number you want to watch, because if you've made up your mind by today, which is the day before like ballots are due, then you have already voted. But if you're the 22%, you're rallying for somebody, or you're rallying, it's a mixed number. So it's anybody's game at this point, not even just Dixon, Miller, and Scott's game. It's everybody who's involved. 22% can swing as easily left as it can right, and 22%, any right-wing voters might slide left because they like somebody's policies. These numbers, I believe you said they were Democratic voters, correct?
Right. They were among likely Democratic voters done by the Baltimore Sun.
Correct.
With the University of Baltimore.
Yep. University UB has an outstanding law program. UB is an exceptional university, and I don't doubt that their survey has legs to stand on. But as I said before, there's 3 kinds of lies, and statistics are one of them. And while as 2 people are headlining the race 3% above the 3rd place, there's still that 22%. And 22% of undecided, they could all write in George Bush and he would win mayor, because the 22% is bigger than anybody's 18%. If everybody came together, they could vote for anybody. And that just goes to show the power of the undecided voter. So that's something to look at in that sense.
I think it's like we're seeing it as an unofficial vote for what is going to be the mayor of Baltimore, because there's more likelihood that in the general election, the Democrat is going to win, because that's what history has shown us as of thus far.
At 100% of the time.
Yeah, I don't believe that any of the Republican candidates who have declared themselves to run for this race have really a probable chance of being the new leader of Baltimore. It would be a drastic change. And again, we've seen drastic changes happen within elections. But in the city of Baltimore, I just don't see it happening.
Baltimore's not going to get a Republican mayor. It was hard enough for Baltimore to elect a white mayor with Martin O'Malley, and that didn't turn out well. So you can imagine they're going to have about a 20 to 30 year distrust with anybody who is not appealing to the demographic of being a black candidate. So we have some things to look at here, but primarily if I have to take a vote to look at, I'm looking at Sheila Dixon and Brandon Scott. I like Sheila Dixon for taking the position. I don't like her as a candidate. I do not like her platform. I do not like what she runs for, but I do believe that she has the name recognition, and that's what wins elections. Brandon Scott has a good legs to stand on. And with that, we are going to cut to our next segment.
That's right. Hold on. And just a quick moment, we're going to invite our special guest who's here with us this evening. Our former, or at least my former teacher, worked at our old high school of Long Reach High School. Mr. Anthony Bond is joining us today. How's
it going, guys?
How's it going,
Thank you very much for inviting me into your platform.
Absolutely, that's no problem. Absolutely. Yeah, we look out every week, and we're just getting this off the ground, wheels up. But It's great to get somebody who can give us some light on it, especially considering you are an African-American man living in America and you have a background as a history teacher. So you know the entire American history cover to cover, and you can help enlighten us on maybe what's going on here, the relevancy of it, and how it compares to the past.
Okay. So, so are we talking about like the protest aspect of what's happening right now?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
One of the biggest parts right now, as you're familiar, is with the current George Floyd events that have happened after he was brutalized by police officers. And then following that, the protests in Minneapolis that have evolved into protests across the United States, going into Atlanta, going into Washington, D.C. And we're going to look at the fallback from that. So you wouldn't mind if we'll tell us a little bit about yourself first, give the viewers a little background on you.
All right. I'll give a little background. My name is Anthony Bond. Of course, I teach at Long Reach High School. This is my 21st year teaching in Maryland. I'm originally from Virginia. I've lived in the South pretty much most of my life. I lived in Georgia for about 7 years. Then the rest of my time, I've lived in Virginia. I love history. I love politics. Ever since I've been a young child, I've always watched the news and asked a whole bunch of questions and, just studied everything. Right now we're seeing definitely a time that, it's a precedent, but I think the election of Donald Trump also, announced a precedent also, because we saw a candidate that, to me, Trump laid out a blueprint, a blueprint of what you can do when you don't need the money from the Democrats and Republicans. He kind of, that's why he was able to kind of do whatever he wanted to do without being kind of like restricted by the Republicans, because he had his own money. He had access to, the media. He had connections to Hollywood. He didn't really need them. And then it turned out that they needed him, which is why they ended up endorsing him. Is, if you look close, you saw a lot of people that said a lot of things about him. And then as soon as he got the endorsement, everybody changed everything that they said. I think one of the most famous ones was what's the guy's name who retired? Oh man, I can't remember his name, but I just remember he had daughters, and they asked him would he have his daughter around Donald Trump, and he said no. But then once Trump got the endorsement, he kind of changed up. So we saw a lot of differences with what was going on right now. Like I say, I'm a political, I guess kind of like a political junkie. I like to study, but mostly I'm like a historical junkie. I like to read things and investigate, and just try to look deeper into some of the things that are actually going on, because the biggest problem that we have is there's so much misinformation out there that is created to sway the uneducated voter, which the majority of Americans are uneducated, uninterested voters, which is why we have, like, I think Obama was one of the highest percentages, and it was still just like 60% of the people who could vote actually voted. So you have a lot of people that don't really know a lot. They go off headlines, which is why Donald Trump, has been so effective, because, using Twitter the way that he uses it, people aren't going to read a full, expose article, but they'll read that tweet that he writes. And, the way that he writes it is very, it's very relatable. It sounds just like a regular person talking. It's not, you don't have to run and get a dictionary to try to figure out. Sometimes with Obama, when he wrote speeches, sometimes the language was way up here and you couldn't really understand it. Absolutely. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Well, and as you said, as Obama being the biggest landslide, quote unquote, that we've seen, we haven't seen anything alike since Roosevelt or Nixon winning with 97.6 and 99% of the vote nationally. We haven't seen those kind of numbers anywhere. And I would be hard pressed to believe that we might ever see those numbers again, just given the state of the country. Gerald, you were saying earlier how the country is either you stand with somebody or you completely disagree with it. And I think that factors into even what we see with these protests today. So what do you think the misconceptions are about the protests, and what should people think about them?
Well, I think the misconceptions. See, the biggest thing is to look at these protests, you got to look at the historical background behind those communities that are standing up and protesting. When you look at the historical background of those communities, a lot of those communities are communities that have been kind of downtrodden. A lot of people they see, they think we've made it, but you got to look deeper into those communities. Like, coming to Long Beach was like a really big thing for me. When I got there, I was looking around and I was just amazed at all the stuff that was there. I mean, I came from teaching 9 years in Baltimore City where I didn't have a lot of the resources. I mean, I didn't have a laptop. I didn't have.
Where did you teach, if you don't mind?
I taught at Calverton Elementary School, which now is closed because it finally closed because somebody realized that the heating system didn't work, but the heating system didn't really work the entire 9 years I worked there. But it got on the news, and so, people found it. And, a lot of those communities are downtrodden right? Community. What you say?
That's West Side, right?
Yeah. West Baltimore, right off of Emerson Avenue.
Yeah,
most of those communities are downtrodden. There's a lot of distrust with the police. There's a lot of there's a huge lack of resources. All right, there's a huge Amari, can I stop, please? There's a huge lack of resources. There's a huge lack of, information. Like I remember the mayor came to my school. He took a picture and got in the car and left. Like he was there for like 1 minute. He took a picture. By the time we went to the front to see him, he was gone. So those communities are kind of forgotten. And so, when big historical things happen, a lot of those people are holding a lot of stuff in. They're angry. And so, you have an explosion of emotion that comes with that. And what makes this one different is I really believe that you're seeing a lot of provocateurs from different areas coming in. I think that you probably have, just from some of the stuff I've been reading, I think that you probably have some international influence, just like with the last election, where you had a lot of, social media that they were fake. The storylines that are fake, other countries have really, really gotten into the hacking. And I think a lot of that is kind of behind the scenes. You have people publishing stuff on Facebook, social media. Like I was on something today and I was really angry and I was reading about it. Then I clicked on the article and the story was 5 years old. But they were like all these people typing about it and everybody thought it was like right now. So you have so much information access and it's so easy to kind of get a story going that you have a lot of people that, believe things that aren't true. But with the, with the riots, those are a lot of people that are pretty much being ignored on a regular basis. And this is the time where, the world's actually listening for once. And, you got a lot of frustrated people. You got people that are, people that are doing some looting. The looting is kind of tricky because, everybody knows that America runs off money. So if you can disrupt the economic system, you can get some attention now as how you disrupt the economic system, which is the key. What's more powerful, disrupting something such as kind of like how King did the Montgomery bus boycott. We haven't seen unification like that in a long, long time, where a large amount of people made an economic decision to kind of stick together like that. We don't really stick together anymore. As far as looting the stores, I don't think that's doing anything because most of those stores have insurance. And a lot of those stores have been closed. A lot of those stores haven't made a lot of money since March. So, the insurance is going to pay for everything that's taken out of that store. And the way the insurance fraud works in America, they're probably going to pay more than what was ever taken out of those stores, which, that's a whole nother conversation. Gerald knows when we had government, we were talking about, lobbying. It's a lot of things that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, I had an OB for government.
Oh, okay.
Yep, my 10th grade. So I learned a bunch about everything there. So with that, with the looting and everything, there were the 2015 Baltimore riots, and then there was the other. Gerald, you can help me out. Ferguson. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. The Ferguson riots. And as you said, it's people coming over from all across the nation, people who are flying in from San Diego, from Los Angeles, from New York City, from Detroit. They're coming from everywhere. And at the end of the day, they can hop a flight and go home and not have to deal with it. And one of those things I was discussing with Gerald is especially apparent in Baltimore. And the Baltimore protest today, they marched, they were in Camden Yards, and they marched down to the city buildings, and they chanted, and then they took off. And that was it. And I think Baltimore is not, they're not ready, and they understand what has happened when it comes to rioting, it comes to looting, and nobody wants that anymore in Baltimore. So do you think that's an accurate assessment, is that Baltimore is like they act like they've been there before?
I mean, they definitely learned a lesson. They learned a lesson from the last time. I mean, when you look at Baltimore, before Freddie Gray, there hadn't been a major riot in a long time. So I mean, that taught a lot of lessons. You know, like for instance, one of the big things was they shut down the bus system with the Freddie Gray, and so a lot of the kids who ended up rioting, they couldn't get home. You know, they were kind of stuck in that area. When you shut down the system, if I'm stuck here and I can't get out, I'm going to kind of do some things.
Well, and it also affects all of the people who are living, specifically more of the area that I'm familiar with is West Side around Park Heights Avenue and off the Reisterstown Road. That area, if you're going down to South Baltimore to work, if the buses are shut down, you're not getting to work.
True.
So when all of this comes down right now during the pandemic, it's half of the bus is shut off. The front half you can't board, and you got to get on the back. And it really messes with the flow. So when everything is shut down, you're hurting the community.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. And the community is already hurt. I mean, Freddie Gray's community, you know, that's actually, so the school that I taught at was probably 10 minutes from where he got killed, 10 minutes from where he lost his life. So I kind of was familiar with that community. I mean, you got a high drug community, high crime community. You know, you got a lot of things such as, you know, slumlord type housing. You got a lot of things such as, you know, lead pipes. You know, I think Freddie Gray had won some money from a case of lead. You know, and just the little things like that a lot of people don't think about. You know, just lead. Most of the major cities in America have a lead issue because lead piping was used throughout the 20s and 30s, and it's underneath all these older cities, and it would be extremely expensive to get it out, so it's still down there. I mean, they use additives now to try to reduce the lead amounts, but the additives are really expensive. So in a lot of communities, people are drinking water that's, you know, that's tainted. And one thing the lead does is it gives you a lot of learning disabilities. So when you take, okay, well, the kids in the poor community are bad, they can't learn, and they might be having issues because they've been exposed to lead through those, you know, piping, those slumlord type conditions. And I think Freddie Gray, he did have, if I'm not mistaken, he had a case of lead. I mean, lead does a lot of things when you're consuming it into your body. It affects your brain, it affects your thinking. I think it can give you ADHD. It can make you, it can make it kind of difficult for you to take in information. So, you know, you got kids that you know, are afflicted with those things. They're going to struggle in school. And then when you factor in all the other things that most poor communities deal with, you know, the schools usually are structurally have issues. Resource-wise, they have issues. They normally have a high turnover in things like school superintendents. Normally things like administration, the turnover is high. If you keep having school leadership turnover over and over again, no one ever gets to kind of get their program off the ground. You know, Dr. Moderano came into Howard County. You know, he had some things that he really just got going this year. I mean, this is his third year. If he was gone in a year or two, he would have never gotten his platform off the ground.
Absolutely. And especially in Howard County, we saw, and Howard County and Baltimore City, though they're vastly different, they both have their own issues, and some of them can be tied together. Yes. For instance, it's discretionary funding is the biggest problem with it. We saw in the aughts with Martin O'Malley putting money in places that it never should have gone, neglecting neglecting education and neglecting HUD, and putting the police on every single corner in East and West. and just rebuilding the waterfront, that doesn't make for a healthy thing. And then in my own personal experience in the early 2010s, our superintendent was not doing an incredible job. I'm not going to name names. Not doing an incredible job of keeping up with school development, and was pushing the schools that were already ahead to get further ahead, and the schools that were behind were not making the numbers, so they didn't get the funding that they needed.
Yeah, I mean, no Child Left Behind. It really, I mean, it's kind of weird because it was called No Child Left Behind, but the schools that didn't excel got less stuff. So it's kind of like, okay, so if I'm already behind, how do I catch up if I'm getting less resources? And then, once they started adding, monetary goals to different milestones that your school could meet, I mean, it kind of opened it up to a lot of different things,
And another thing to be met with that is, with No Child Left Behind came something called social promotion, which some people are not familiar with. It's when you get to a certain age, they're going to advance you to the next grade, regardless of whether or not you have learned enough in your grade for that. And with that, and with everything that we've just talked about regarding Baltimore, I urge everybody who has any interest in learning about Baltimore, watch the show called The Wire. That'll give you everything. That it's a compendium. There's not a bit of exaggeration in it.
It's pretty accurate too.
It's made by people who have studied Baltimore, who have been inside the Baltimore City Police Department, inside of education, and it keeps track of all that. But I don't want to stay on Maryland too long for anybody who is interested in seeing the global, or not the global, but the national scale of it. So we're going to look at a little broad thing here. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with what is going on in social media, but it seems like there is a giant gathering of social media promotion of these protests and of giving out resources and making sure that you are active on that. One of the problems Gerald and I were discussing earlier is that it comes to a sort of in and an out group. And in the in group are people who are putting out links to like protest pages or support pages, and then they're taking screenshots of their donations to Memorial Fund or Bail Relief Fund. And then the out group is people who don't post anything about it. I personally think that if you don't post something, it's not that you're silent on the issue. It's that you don't look at social media as the number one thing to get things across to people. Now, I'd be interested to know if you think, like, how you think that should operate, if it's an obligation to put something out there.
Well, the biggest thing is, like, for me, being an adult, being a teacher, my social media is not, if I didn't have this job, my social media would be very different. Like, absolutely. I have parents on there, I have students, I have my family, my older family. So, a lot of people stay away from things based off of where they work. Like, if you work for the federal government, you're not going to post certain stuff. If you work for law enforcement, you're not going to post certain stuff. So I think the biggest thing with social media is, I don't think you're obligated to say anything, but I think right now it's kind of like everybody's attacking each other because everybody's like, oh, Corey didn't post anything, so he doesn't care. And then they're like saying stuff about you. So it's kind of like we're all getting distracted from the real problem by infighting on each other. Because, I mean, the posting is fine, but, my problem is that with these issues, whenever they die down, everybody goes back to their normal life. Like, I was talking to a friend, and I'm like, man, if that NBA comes back in July, it's going to be a lot of people that forget all about this and start watching basketball. They're going to have that little play-in tournament and Disney and all of that. They're going to get distracted. See, I mean, it's with social media, the people that are influencing it, a lot of those people aren't even real people. A lot of those people aren't real people. A lot of those people are created. They're fake profiles. And so they kind of get those things going. I mean, I do think that, the sharing has helped a lot. I think that before social media, people weren't, you weren't learning as much. So I enjoy it, but the big thing is a lot of people don't realize that, everything you read, double check it because it might not be accurate. It might be recycled. It might be something that's really, really old. It might be something that's coming from a platform that, really leans one way, the extreme left or extreme right. So you got to make sure. So I really think that people bringing this to social media is a big thing, but you got to be careful exactly what you bring. Because, I mean, if you continue to bring the negativity, it can incite things. I mean, we got to make sure that we cover all aspects of what's happening with this situation. Because, I mean, with this situation, you have, bad news sells. Bad news sells. So you see most of the main websites, they're mainly showing people running, people fighting. They're not the peaceful protesters don't really get as much camera time. So if you're looking, you would think that every single person out there is stealing, running, robbing things. So if you're using social media to get your main news, you just got to make sure that you understand that your social media may not actually be accurate. You know what I mean? This political system, especially with this being an election year, Democrats and Republicans, I mean, if you look historically at all the different schemes that both of those sides have used to get votes, I mean, just from, if you take a look back at, with Kennedy and, the threats that he faced for being a Catholic president, then it became out that later on some of those threats were created and sent out by his own party. So he might have gotten a couple calls, but they kind of made it seem like it was this huge thing, like he was going to get killed. But then they come to find out some of that stuff came internally from him. You had George Bush, the 1988 election. You had John McCain then. So you had John McCain then, and I can't remember who it was. It was someone from the Bush camp. They sent out something about John McCain, and John McCain dropped in the polls. Then they found out that it wasn't true. I mean, every election you have so many different people sending out false information. And, of course, then you'll blame it on some random person that was working in my office. But a lot of times, that's how it works. I mean, just a big thing that I always look at is the Gallup poll. They put these polls on. And, I mean, to be a Gallup poll, you really only have to have like 100 people, and the whole thing could be done over the phone. If they call you and say, Gerald, are you 18 and you're in 6th grade, and you say yes and answer the questions, that's not really an accurate poll. But what they found out is that some people who don't know anything, they look at those polls. So I don't know anything about Corey, but when I picked up the newspaper, the poll said Corey's up 20 points. So I'm going to just go ahead and vote for Corey. So, a lot of that stuff is, programmed with misinformation because they know the majority of Americans just don't know. And I'm not going to say they don't care, but they just don't. They're not involved.
Right. It's an uneducated voter. And that fed in perfectly to our last segment where I talked about Obi's famous line, there's 3 lies, damn lies, and statistics. And so a lot of people are posting on social media, and it's people I know, and everybody's posting, and they show their donation amounts. And to a point that to me feels like giving a homeless man money and filming it on camera. It almost feels disingenuous, as if you're only doing it for your own pride so you can get commended, as opposed to that you're doing it out of a good cause. But
that's tricky though, because some people legit are doing it so that they can inspire others. Some people are doing it just so they can say, look what I did. So it's kind of a catch-22, because when you show a good deed, sometimes it does light a fire under other people to get things done. But sometimes, you really got to know the person, because you know a person that's just giving money. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah,
right. without a doubt. And this will feed into my last question, and Gerald's going to take it from here. One of the biggest things that I've seen posted around a couple times were
my son's going to join us.
Absolutely. That's not a problem.
Go ahead. Perfect.
The next question is, I've seen a lot of talking spread it around. There was somebody said, like, here's resources. Being not racist is not enough. You need to be anti-racist. Here's how to do that. And I believe that in my own belief, as somebody who has never been affected by any racism, is if you're racist, if you're not racist, then you hate racists. It's the same as if you're not a rapist, you hate rapists. If you're not a child predator, then you hate child predators. Now, this doesn't apply to everybody because some people will be like, oh, yeah, I'm friends with him, but, I'm not going to tell him how I feel. And that's on the individual. But do you feel there's a difference between being not racist and being anti-racist?
Yeah, it's funny that you said that because Howard County has a lot of interesting programs, and this is the book that I'm in a book study right now. And if you look at it, it says stamped racism, anti-racism, and you. So we were kind of reading this, and it was talking about anti-racism. I think if you are not verbally against racism, like silence is basically allowing something to live. So to me, if you're silent and you're not speaking against it, you're basically helping it because you're not a voice speaking against it. Your silence, people can take silence anyway. Like Gerald never says anything, so I just assume Gerald doesn't have any problems with it. Now, he may hate racists also, but because he's not saying anything, I'm thinking that he's okay with it. So, when we're silent about racism, it's almost kind of like our silence supports that problem. Because if something's happening and we're not speaking against it, then, it's easy to assume that we are for it. Easy to assume that we're for it. So, I mean, anti-racism is, when you fight and you go against it, and you verbally speak against it, and it doesn't have to be verbal, but you're taking actions against it. If you're just silent, no one knows what your true feelings are. A lot of people hide behind silence. They don't say anything. But, at some point in time, normally their actions will tell, how they feel.
All right. And very last thing, how would somebody go about displaying themselves as anti-racist if you're not looking towards, if you don't view social media as a correct outlet to put things out? Would it just be in your community, decrying it, standing in on protests, doing a certain measure of community involvement?
I think it probably could start small, you being the voice amongst your friend group. Because some people, because you have such extreme conditions right now, some people aren't going to say anything by threat of their job. I don't really do political stuff at school just because, there's a lot of different rules with the school system. I talk to the students. I do a lot of my things outside of school. So I think just small things, speaking up. If they hear their friends saying something racist, speaking up against it, speaking out for it. But social media, don't get me wrong, that's the perfect platform for people that don't want to say anything because that meme speaks volumes. That meme, you can just put it up there. You can turn the comments off. So you are expressing yourself by that meme. So you can use social media, but you just have to make sure that what you're presenting is accurate. You can speak out to your friend group. You can make sure if you see anything racist going on, you can maybe kind of intervene. A lot of it is just verbal. A lot of it's verbal. Most racist people don't know a person of the race that they hate. Most people have no interaction. The media is very, very influential. I see black people on TV. They're doing this. Mr. Bond is black, so Mr. Bond is those people. That's how a lot of people operate. So by trying to get to know other groups, trying to make sure that you support those other groups, speaking up amongst your friends, because friends will say all kinds of things, but you really have to verbalize, put them in the right position. Because right, everybody, you all are young. You all are getting hit from all angles with all kinds of misinformation. A lot of people they believe every single thing that they read on the internet. You got a lot of political games going on. You got a lot of political games. Some people, because they're not students of history, they don't realize the extremes that politicians go to get points across. The lies that they'll tell. You can look at so many different things, like the whole war on drugs and, the fact that black people are the majority of people on welfare. None of that stuff is real, but you hear it so much. You think it's real. Because, it's like when I was young, it was even stuff that I just believed because I heard it all the time, over again. But a lot of research and stuff myself, I found out exactly what was true and what was not true. So I think, anti-racist, number one, you on a platform, it can be maybe you with one friend. You have one friend that might have racist views. Challenge that person. Whenever people come and ask me stuff, I always ask them why. Like, why do you support Barack Obama? Why do you support Donald Trump? Why do you support George Bush? And the majority of people that ask why can never give a why. It's like, why? And those are the people that aren't educated on their vote. But so many people, they just feel comfortable. They see those television snippets, they see those highlights, the celebrity that they like endorses that person, like, oh man, I like Kanye's music, so Kanye says this, so it has to be true. There's a reason why they use those different types of those political. I think you had glittering generalities. That was what I'm trying to get back on my government thing. So Gerald, this year I'm teaching government for the first time in 4 years, so I got to kind of dust off all my stuff. There's glittering generalities is a type. There's of course celebrities. That's a type. My son said transfer. Yeah, my son, he took government this year because he's in Baltimore County. So there's transfer. How does transfer work?
This one you would use like an American Eagle or red, white, and blue to connect with the people.
Okay. All right. Good job.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Good young Mr. Bond coming in with that one.
Yeah,
Up
he's
in
got
his
the
dad.
glasses too, so he looks really smart.
Looks
Right.
No, it's more than a look. I'll tell you that much.
There you go.
He came with that one handy. He had the study
Yeah, he
guide
was
next
ready.
to him or everything.
That's right. Yeah.
Gonna have him on the next one.
Yeah.
All right, Gerald, you're up next for any questions.
Yeah. So if I can digress a little bit from the social media thing, but still stay, on topic with what is going on around us.
Mhm.
I personally do not remember much, or at least I remember what happened in Baltimore in 2015. It was close to us. It was part of a different thing, different march, different situations.
They canceled
in
my
different cities
White
happening.
Sox game that I was supposed to go to.
Right, the cancel game. Well, everything's canceled right now, so
That's
they
such
were-
that's such a privileged problem to have during those trying times.
I know.
I had to watch it at home on my 55-inch flat screen.
There you
In
go.
the AC, working AC. Woe is me.
Right, exactly. But if I think back, this is the first time I've seen the mobilization of an undercut, unprivileged community simultaneously around the country, all stepping into the limelight to have their voices heard. And it was sparked off, obviously, by these protests in Minneapolis and St. Paul in Minnesota. And it's been spreading almost every single night. The next night, you go around, you see things in Chicago, in Dallas, and in Austin. The next night you see Washington, D.C. getting more attention, and Miami and New York City. And then, recently you have L.A., you have Sacramento and San Diego, and just along with all the other cities I've mentioned and many more. There were I think they tracked it over 100 different protests last night alone of people who have been, disadvantaged, who have been, they feel, or who have rightly so been, unjustly left behind by a system that can be described as broken. So I guess my question for this is, these protests, obviously, these protesters, they have a right to protest. I'm, fully aware of the fact that, you have your right to have your voice heard.
In your Bill of
You
Rights.
have a right to, exactly. You can
The
march.
very first thing in the Bill of Rights.
Freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. And, I think this video opened up everyone's eyes and said, if we don't start acting now, uniting as much as possible all over the country, then the message will be lost again. Because like you said, this country has a short attention span. As soon as a single sport in this country comes back, half the people are going to be forgetting about it.
Listen, football season. When football
There's
season
a 30-team NHL, college football, MLB's looking to come
they're
back.
still talking about possibly having Major League Baseball this summer. So we're working with a very short time frame because when those sports come back, and number one, when those sports come back, those cities that have those sports, they're not going to allow anything to interfere with that sport. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're also going to have, I mean, just with that sport, a lot of these people that are protesting, they work in those stadiums. They work in those parking lots. They're selling beer at those stadiums. So it's going to create a lot of conflict because, at some point in time, I'm going to have to go to work. And if your protest is stopping me from going to work down at Raven Stadium, it's going to be a problem.
Right. And so with this whole situation happening, and I think, if I probably turn on the TV again, you're going to see the way the media portrays it is showing most of the time the worst of what's going on, the buildings that are being,
Same clip over and over.
Same clips over and over again. Right. Exactly. So do you think that is there a better way to get this message across, or is this actually, because I think I'm not one to tell someone how exactly to protest. Like, I know that our Constitution, our laws, we have guidelines and we have things like that. But do you think that overall these protests are getting the correct message across, or are people still getting distracted by things on the side?
I think if you're there, the message is getting across because the news, most of these protests at some point in time, there's a speaker there. Most of these protests are organized. They march to a certain point, then they speak. But that's the problem. When the news, you never see that platform part. You never see when they get to that point and they speak about their, and they give the speech. Most of these protests have a leader. Most of them have somebody, like the people with the megaphones. You never see them on the news. All you see are the people running. You don't see the people that are like stating facts. They never make the news clip. So I think if you're on the ground, these protests are successful. But if you're watching them from the TV doesn't show any of the people that are calm and talking and speaking factual. Like, I mean, if you watch CNN, you may get a little bit like, I saw some of the protests on CNN, and they had like some lawyers speaking, but most of the time you don't see that on TV. That's why I've seen those clips few and far between. So I think on the ground is effective if you're there, if you're seeing the whole thing. But as night falls, like most of those positive people are gone once it gets dark and things change. And that's what the news media covers the most. Like, I had a friend in Philadelphia, and I was talking to her today, and she was saying that she went to one, and it started at the art museum in Philadelphia, and it went downtown. Then it got to a certain place, and I think she said it ended at 3, and at about 4 o'clock, the looting started. And the news only showed 4 o'clock on. They never showed the beginning part. I think they had like speakers. They had all these different people speak. That part never makes the news. The looting part does, but the positive informational part, it never seems to get on TV, and that's the problem. So if you're on the ground, these things are working. But if you're watching on TV, you don't know. And the thing is, you got to be really careful because, a lot of people, they just see the looting on TV and they just write the whole thing off. Oh, they're just down there. But you miss the whole positive aspect of it. There's probably, if you're protesting and you don't create an issue, if everything's allowed to kind of operate the same way, you're not going to get any attention. You're going to have to do some stuff, blocking off streets, stuff like that. I'm not talking about tearing up cars, but you got to create a disruption to get the platform. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr., there's a reason why he always wanted the media there when he went places, because, without the media being present and being able to show, those things, like, I mean, the Selma, Alabama, I think it was the Pettus Bridge. I'm probably missing the beginning of it. But the news media, that was one of the first times that, people being beaten actually made the news. And Selma changed everything.
Right, and that's why it was seen as such a turning point. And I guess that leads to my next question. Like I said, I think better than before, not perfectly, but better than before, the message of this united front going against a broken system is being heard, and it's being spread out for the most part correctly and honestly. And it's, the attention is being brought to the struggles of these disenfranchised communities and this disenfranchised group of people. And, I believe in the next 50 years, and I remember talking earlier, like a couple years ago, to one of your colleagues, Miss McCulley.
Mm-hmm.
I remember talking to her, and I remember telling her this joke that was online. It was after 2016 when people thought that was the worst year so far.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I said it's like the history books are going to go 2014, 2015, and then we don't talk about that, and then 2017. And she was very, and then very quickly, she said, "Oh no, that's going to be labeled. This is the one we spend extra time on." because we need to learn from the mistakes and the events of the past. And that's what I'm viewing this year as. This year has, let's be honest, it's been a very busy year with so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe that this can be the turning point for when the people of these disenfranchised communities finally turn the tables on the political system and try to make things, better for themselves and for their future generations of those who will be growing up behind them. They're going to be teaching their kids, this is how you protest correctly. These are the messages we want to put out and show the world. This is the voice and the power of the voice that you have when we can come together and do this.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if I can, put a personal note on this, I know that in the Hispanic community, there's a lot of young people who are getting involved and supporting this movement because it, not only, are we most of the time people of color, but we are people that, have also faced some form of discrimination before. So, there's an understanding of how it feels to be, looked down upon by someone who thinks they're better than you. But there's also an older generation, and the newer generation is doing a lot better, but an older generation of Hispanic and Latino community members who are also very colorist, who are also very much, who look down upon people who are different from them the same way that, same way we're being discriminated against, they're discriminating against other people because either they're from an indigenous group that is seen as less civilized or less wealthy. They're from also a township or a place that has been ravaged by war. I mean, my father came to this country in 1986 or 87, somewhere around there, to escape, the throngs of a guerrilla warfare situation. He escaped the country and was able to come here, and thankfully he was never caught up in that situation. But he's seen what unrest is. He's seen what what happens when the government turns on its people. And I think that's a fear that a lot of people have, is that this government will completely turn its back on this group of people. But like I said, this could be the turning point where it says, people aren't going to let themselves be forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be the turning point for the better for a lot of these people who have been left behind.
I mean, I definitely think it could be, but the key is, that you're going to have to stay focused. A lot of people need to realize that, presidential elections are important. I mean, we got the Electoral College that eats up a lot of our power. The local elections are where the money is. I mean, I just think one big thing that Governor Hogan has shown us is that you don't always have to follow what the president says. Kind of like how he went out and did all those different things. That's where the power is. People need to look locally, like their city councils. City council spot is very, very powerful. City council spot, county executive, state senate, state legislature, because they're the ones that they're the ones that are in charge of implementing the things that come from the White House. And as you can see from Governor Hogan, you don't always have to implement every single thing. So that's why we need to pay attention on who we're putting into those local elections, because a lot of people don't even vote locally. They'll say it was not one of the big ones. But the local, Annapolis has more control over our life directly than Washington, D.C. Like Annapolis is the one that's controlling Howard County school budget. Like Annapolis is the one that's controlling, stuff like, car insurance in Maryland. They're the ones that are controlling things that direct your life. And a lot of people just write those off. Local elections, they have even a lower turnout than the presidential elections. But the local elections have the power. So, I think we can definitely keep this movement going. I mean, we got to make sure that we look at who we're putting in office locally. And, I definitely think that social media, if used correctly, can do great things, because so many of the things that our politicians do, like, I mean, I don't know if I did it with your class, but I remember I had the kids try to follow a bill and who voted on what. I mean, if you look at that, it's like Sanskrit. It's like a big grid with all these different numbers. You got to know the bill docket number and all. It's very difficult to figure out who voted for what. But that's one thing that social media can do. If used properly, it can kind of take the blindfold off of some of that stuff and lay it out there right before you. But you got to make sure that, the source is non-biased. Because, I mean, both sides, Democrats, Republicans, they're very similar. They're very similar. If you look close, they're very similar. One group looks like they support one thing, but one thing that both of those parties, tie into are money. Money is really, really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to cut in real quick. I personally worked in the last session for the Maryland legislature as legislative assistant in the Howard County legislature for Delegate Kittleman, and sat in on some of the Howard County delegation meetings. And a lot of it tackled the issues that we saw in Howard County schools and even beyond, such as it was 04-20, which was the zoning requirements for Howard County and moving the zonings outside. And then there was the so-called quote unquote redistricting of Howard County schools. And just working in that and around that, you see that there's a far bigger impact on Marylanders' day-to-day life that comes through Annapolis than anywhere else. Annapolis sets a precedent. Now it's illegal to release balloons into the air because Annapolis said so. You face a fine if you put balloons in the air because Annapolis said so. It's not because Trump said so.
Yeah.
It's Annapolis. And Hogan has done miraculous things of showing that it doesn't necessarily come from federal. Him and there's about 17 other governors who one of them is it's Georgia's governor has done an excellent job, and so has Virginia's, of showing that it's a federalist system. That the states are in control of the states, and they show what they can do, and we're not beholden to a federal power telling us this.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we definitely seen a lot of. I mean, I think I at least started seeing it more when I saw states challenging the Affordable Health Care Act.
Yep.
Where we had different state governors stand up and say they weren't going to implement it, and I was like, wow, thinking I thought whatever DC voted for had to happen. But I mean, if you look back, you look back at like stuff like, just look at Brown versus Board of Education. Some of those, that was a federal Supreme Court case, but some of those states took 20 years to implement what they were supposed to do. They took 20 years to implement that. Some of the states took 20 years to get rid of some of their gender biases that were located in some of their documentation against women. But, in a long time, we haven't seen it, though. We haven't seen it, at least not as prominent as this. So, we really got to get people out there on those local elections, because the local elections, they're the ones, like you said, Corey, they're the ones that really, they have more control over your life, the local politics.
All right.
Right. Yeah. And also to, just to hammer that point home, tomorrow is election day in the state. Technically, you have to have your ballots in either into the mail or at the drop-off boxes by tomorrow for it to be, for it to be counted and everything. So we'll see what the results are. We see a very close race for the mayorship in Baltimore right now between Sheila Dixon, I think Scott Miller,
Sheila Dixon, Mayor Young. I think he's the current mayor. Jack Young.
He is running, but from what I've seen, it doesn't look very good. He's like polling 5%, at least in the latest Baltimore Sun poll. But
I mean, initially he said he didn't want to run, but then he started to run. So I'm not sure how locked in he is. I mean, Sheila Dixon seems to have a big push right now. So I mean, it's definitely going to be exciting when I wake up to see who the candidate is. You know, a lot of times with Baltimore, you know, nobody rarely even knows the Republican candidate because I don't know when the last time Baltimore had a Republican mayor.
I think it was like the 70s or something. It might have been that long ago.
Might have been before then.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so we'll be interested to see. And again, like you said, these local elections are the ones that are really going to determine how your everyday life is affected.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's Sheila Dixon, Brandon Scott, and Mary Miller.
Dixon, Brandon Scott, Justin. What's the guy's name? Charles? No, what's the guy's name that used to work? Oh, T.J. Smith. So T.J. Smith, yep. He used to work for the police department. You have Brandon Young. You have I'm not sure what her name is. Oh, Theroux.
The former deputy attorney general for the state.
Yeah,
but the biggest thing here is that based on these last polls that were done by the Baltimore Sun is that, and these were done like about a week ago, is that there's still 22% of the people who are undecided, of people who they polled, that undecided about who they want to vote for. You know, and we were talking about that earlier. That could swing the entire election towards anyone. That's more than anyone even has committed to their own candidacy. So you know it. But again,
Sheila Dixon looks good to me because just the fact that Sheila Dixon. So like, I mean, the older people are the ones that vote most anyway, and a lot of the older people they vote off people that they're familiar with. They're very familiar with Sheila Dixon. I mean, the last election that Sheila Dixon ran for, which she lost to
Catherine Pugh.
Yeah, Catherine Pugh. Sheila Dixon only lost by a small amount. So, you know, the bottom line is, you know, people are going to vote with who they're familiar with. I mean, this is a very, very important election for, you know, Baltimore. Baltimore's had, you know, very bad luck. I mean, Sheila Dixon was part of it, but we've had 3 straight mayors that have had, you know, some issues, legal issues. So, you know, we really got to get the city back on track. Really do.
Right.
Yep. All right. And that's going to bring us to the closing of this episode. Gerald, any finishing remarks?
Just in closing, I guess, you know, I don't know. I don't see this situation, to say that, to put it in a certain way, I don't see this situation cooling down anytime soon or being forgotten anytime soon. It, you know, it also is aided by the fact that a lot of people are out of work. A lot of people don't have anything to do. So they're taking to this movement. And it's a good thing that for the most part, this message is still being preserved of uniting your voices towards a better future for yourself and for those who are coming behind you. So, you know, I just say, you know, if anyone is planning on protesting, you know, make sure you get, or to even supporting on social media or doing anything of the sort, make sure you read up on the information on what you're putting your money into, who you're supporting, and you know, just let's be ready to fight the good fight and make sure that this country is better off than we left it better off for our children than we left it. So,
and I'm going to say that right now, and if however you find your support, whether it's within your friend groups or family or community groups, spreading the word, it is important. However you choose to take action, don't remain idle, as we have seen in the past when it came to World War II or the Civil Rights era. However it comes, being indecisive or being inactive does not help anything in the world. And tantamount to action right now is action forever. That is the second most important thing. Is action right now is important. But if you're posting on your social media about all of this, then do not forget George Floyd's name. Don't forget everything that's happening. Because the wave of the things that have happened have come down to, we're going to protest this for the next 3 weeks and then never talk about it again until something else comes up. And that is that's the biggest crime against anything. That's the reason, if I can personally say, I believe that is the reason why this particular, the 2000s movement of civil rights has not gotten its wheels off the ground in full success, is because after every event, something else comes up. As you said, the NBA season would come back and everybody else is talking about that. Keep talking about it. Whether or not it's the number one thing on your mind. Just remember it and keep talking about it. And then, Anthony, your final remarks?
I definitely, just keep talking about it, because, like, just listen to what you say. A lot of people probably don't even realize that Flint still doesn't have their water fixed.
They don't. And I was talking to Gerald about this in the pre-show.
Yeah,
about
Flint
how
water still isn't fixed, and it's kind of like they were talking about that. Then it shifted to another topic, and I think it seemed like when Flint happened, it might have been ISIS. I can't remember. Was it ISIS?
Yeah, it was 2013 around then.
Something took the media's attention, and as you can see, like you said, when you stop talking about those things, the issues don't ever go away. So we definitely have to make sure that we kind of push those things. Definitely.
And go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say I definitely appreciate you all, because you all are the beginning. You all are the people. And Gerald, when you were in my class, I would say you all are the ones that are going to make the changes. Just you all doing something like this, a lot of your friends aren't as into the information as you all are. So, they'll take it from you because, Corey, they're your friends. Gerald, they're your friends. So they'll take the information. So this platform here, is really, really important. Really important.
And young Mr. Bond, any thoughts from you to close this out?
Lean in.
I guess for me, I think that everyone has a voice. Everyone should have the ability to speak on certain topics, even though you may feel like uncomfortable to do so.
There we go. Then that's intelligent. That you got a bright son right there. I'll tell you that much.
Thank you.
And do you have anything that you want to plug right here? Any projects that you are supporting right now that you want some attention to?
Well, the biggest thing is, tomorrow we're trying to have the peaceful protest over at the mall. It's going to start at 4:00.
The Mall in Columbia.
Yeah, Mall in Columbia.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna march from there down to the
lakefront.
And once we get to the lakefront, there are several people that are going to speak about it. Myself, I'm in the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. My fraternity is going to be there. We're going to kind of go and participate in that. So the biggest thing is, just that, participating in that, and just, making sure that you all keep these things going, because, we got a lot of issues. Absentee ballotism is an issue. People making sure they have all of their IDs and everything straight before we get to November. Making sure they have that universal ID. Just make sure that you have all of your paperwork in order. And, we just need people just to get out there and vote. We need a historic number this year, because, no matter who the president is, if you're only getting 40% of the people, 50% of the people to vote, it just doesn't make any sense.
That's absolutely true. You need everybody out full force to vote in what they believe in, regardless whether or not they are confident in the outcome of how it is. You vote your heart, you vote your conscience, and you come out in November and you do the work.
People die for those rights.
Absolutely, right. More than we can count. Well, anyways, this has been an episode of Let's Talk Politics. We've been joined by the wonderful Anthony Bond and company, and I've been Corey.
I've been Gerald.
And this was Let's Talk Politics. Catch you next week.
Thank you.